from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist, Tony Stewart.
Our subject today is the function and use of libraries in the United States, and that's a topic that's very important, and I've been wanting to do this program for some time, and I'm very fortunate to have my two favorite choices for that program. We want to particularly address the issue of the First Amendment and how that applies to libraries throughout the United States, and it's an appropriate time to be doing this program because just in a few days, April 18th through the 24th, will be Library Week in the United States, and I'm so happy to welcome to the program to my far left, first of all, is John Hartung, who is the co-director of the Kootenai County Libraries, and he comes with very impressive credentials to discuss this important topic. John holds a BA degree in history from the University of Colorado. He has a master's in management from the University of Idaho and has done library science work at Denver University. John, welcome to the program. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Tony.
And I'm equally happy to have with us Mary Carr, who is the director of the North Idaho College Learning Resources, including the new constructed library at North Idaho College. She too comes with very impressive credentials. She holds a BA degree in Latin from the University of Washington in Seattle. She has a master's degree in library sciences from the University of Washington and a second master's degree in human resources management from Gonzaga University. Mary, it's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you, Tony.
And I'm very pleased, as always, to have our two regular panelists to question our guest today. To my immediate left is Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Steve Schenck, who is the Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College, and I shall ask Janelle to commence the questioning.
To set the stage for our discussion today, I'm going to start with John, and can you tell me how does a library decide what books they're going to order and what books they're going to have in the shelves?
We have two policies that the Board of Trustees of the Library District have adopted. One, which was adopted when the libraries consolidated in 1986, is a materials selection policy that outlines the criteria for specific items. And then in 1989, the board adopted a collection development policy, which is an overall view of what the library's mission and roles should be and how the collection should address those missions and roles and what would be appropriate materials to purchase. And we have excerpted that as necessary to provide people who ask the question. So we do have a flyer that we hand out that lists some of the salient points of how a book is selected or not selected.
And so how do you formulate this policy? What are the steps to formulating a policy? Does someone from the staff draw up a suggested policy and then the board passes it? Is that the kind of procedure you go through?
Yes, that's the procedure we use. The staff worked among themselves, sort of as a committee of the whole, to draw up a policy based on other policies that other libraries had used successfully and some suggestions from the Idaho State Library's resource people, and then that was presented to the trustees and they adopted it after discussion.
So Mary, then in your case, where you are serving with a library that is part of a unit, the college, how do you go about formulating those kinds of policies?
We have not yet done that. Since I've been the director of the library, our first and foremost task was to get the new library building built, and secondly, we did a lot in terms of building our staff so that we were able to take on this project. And I'm happy to say we just hired a person, a librarian who started in November, whose job it will be to work on a collection development policy. And in fact, we were just talking about that today in our Library Affairs Committee. So we're hoping to be able to do that, set the stage, the process, work with our faculty, staff, and administration in coming up with a policy. I suspect, judging from other schools that have done this, it will be somewhat an extended process, about a 2-year process, because we work with every one of the divisions and all the curricular matters that have to do with the college.
So what I hear you saying is you want a lot of input
That's
into
right.
this policy, because within the broad parameters of what the law states, the case law and the statutes and the constitutional law, you still have to make certain decisions about where are we going to put our money, what are we going to buy.
That's
is that
right.
a correct
We
analysis?
have limited resources, and we want to be able to expend our money the very best way possible. So in our case, since we serve a school and a curriculum, we want to do the best job possible in extending those resources across the curriculum. We, of course, have been selecting things in the meantime and working with various faculty members, but we want to codify what we're doing and to be able to present that to people who ask the question. But we just haven't had the staff and the resources to do it till this point. So,
Steve Sheen.
Well, I'm tempted to begin by asking Mary a question about that degree in Latin, but instead I'll stick to the topic and ask John, if he would, to tell us a little bit about the why for policies on collection development. Mary mentioned resource allocation, but are there other reasons why you have to have a policy like that?
Well, I certainly think so. Resource allocation is, of course, one of the major issues for a small public library, and we really are a small public library. Simply because we can't buy even all of the bestsellers necessarily in the quantity that we would like to. And so we have to have some rational means of deciding what do we buy and what do we not buy. But there are also issues in terms of gifts that are given, books that are given to the library. We get donations all the time, and we need to have some rational means of dealing with what goes in the library and what doesn't, in terms of someone coming back to the library and saying, well, I gave you this wonderful brand new book that I think is marvelous. Why did you not put it in the collection? And so there needs to be a rational series of steps to go through in terms of the analysis of where that fits in the collection, what other subject matters we have. So there are other than resource management, there are other good reasons to have policies in place.
Mary, John's comment about gifts reminds me of a time, and I think it was shortly after you came to North Idaho College, where we discussed gifts and your concern at that point. This is before the new library was constructed, with shelf space. Mm-hmm. Is that another factor that you take into consideration in developing a policy?
Certainly, because even in the new library, shelf space isn't endless. Mm-hmm. We have a maximum capacity on the first floor of that library building of 65,000 volumes, and you can't, though we haven't reached that by any means, you can't just fill the shelves. And that isn't a responsible way of managing the collection. So certainly, it's always no library can house everything, and you have to decide what it is you need to serve your clientele.
I would like to get to the heart of the program from my perspective, and I am a great lover of discussion of constitutional questions and the First Amendment, and certainly libraries throughout history have experienced, even before the Bill of Rights in this country, and the question of free press and speech, many times censorship. Mary, I'd like to start with you in relation to the question. I've discussed this with you before. We know we look to the Constitution to protect our rights concerning the right to speak, the right to read, and so forth, but also codes deal with this. Would you kind of take our viewers through how both the Constitution, and in our case the Idaho Code, are in concert somehow to protect those freedoms?
Well, of course, the First Amendment protects the freedom of the press and the freedom to read and freedom of speech. And in the case of Idaho, the Idaho Code speaks to that same freedom by defining, first of all, what it does is it defines what obscenity is, which gets to the heart of what the First Amendment gets challenged on. Idaho Code does not specify the difference between obscenity and pornography, as do some states' codes, at least as far as John and I could determine when we looked at it again last night. But it does look at, how should I say it? It does look at what is called defenses, I guess, as to what libraries can have, and applies a defense within the law that says that libraries, schools, and bookstores, museums. Are not exactly exempt, but can use that as defense for having materials that somebody might challenge as being obscene or pornographic.
So, Mary, I hear you saying that the Idaho Code has recognized not only the constitutional protection, which all codes have to do so or they would be stricken, but do I hear you saying that actually there's more freedom for both the selection and the depositing of materials in those centers you've identified than would be in other aspects of society?
I think that's what is being protected there, is the First Amendment in terms of what might be challenged, in terms of what libraries might have, in terms of what a bookstore might be selling, in terms of what museums might have. and that would be visual presentations as well as the written word.
This program originates on the Council of Idaho College, but it also is aired first on a station out of Spokane, Washington, so our viewers in Washington will be very interested. Is the Idaho Code very similar to the Washington Code in dealing with this kind of protection?
It is somewhat similar in that it does have a definition for obscenity, where the difference is, as I understand it, is that the Washington Code has a difference between obscenity and pornography, as has been stated on the federal level as well. And what is protected is things that might be determined to be pornographic in someone's mind. What it does not protect and what is not protected under Idaho Code are those things that are determined to be obscene.
Okay. John, would you like to elaborate upon this question too? That I know that you must from time to time get individuals who complain about collections and all.
Yes, I think there are two issues. First is the one you mentioned of someone who objects to an item in the library, and I think it's important to realize that libraries are not just books. So that we're speaking about
Sure.
about music and video presentations as well as the printed word, and the Idaho Code is clear in providing defenses for libraries and educational institutions to have the freedom to carry a broad range of items. But I think one of the other issues that's very important is that the Idaho Code also provides protection for the individual who comes to the library. Their records are protected by law. They are exempt from the public records search, so that police and busybodies, reporters, may not go to a library and ask to see the circulation lists of who had checked out certain books. And that is clearly spelled out in the code. And that's another protection for the individual to exercise their freedoms under the First Amendment, to use the library to its fullest.
So I hear you saying, John, then that in order sometimes to exercise without any chilling effect your complete right to read what you want to, that you also have to weave that into the privacy protection.
Absolutely. It could and probably would have a chilling effect if it were known that libraries could not or would not protect the privacy of the person checking out items. And there are a wide variety of subjects that could be controversial in a community, and people would not want to have other members of the community know that they were reading or viewing materials.
One final question to Mary before I go back to the panel, and that has to do with this whole question of the American Library Association is a very effective organization putting out a lot of information. I know, Mary, that they have over the years put out lists of different publications. There have been attempts in communities around the country to censor. Would you kind of brief our audience in somewhat of a summary of what some of those publications have been, or how you react to that process?
There's a long list of items that have been censored over the years, and it's quite an interesting list because they're things that you would not expect. Not necessarily the things that people might have red flags about. Say, Playboy is certainly one that people have discussed in numerous forums, but the Bible has been censored. Huckleberry Finn, just a whole host of things that you would think were fairly innocuous kinds of things, or certainly things that people would want to have available, like the Bible. But that just goes to prove that any piece of literature can offend somebody, and that's precisely why the First Amendment is in place, so that I guess the favorite saying that I've seen on shirts that librarians wear rather tongue-in-cheek is they say, "We have something in our library to offend everyone." And what the flip side of that is that we have something in our library that everybody wants, but not all people want the same thing. So.
Thank you. Janelle Burke.
My question is going to be right along the same line. It's often said that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And perhaps the same thing is true with regard to what people find offensive. Certain people will find one thing offensive, and other people will find another thing offensive. And it also seems to me that that's the area that most often libraries are criticized for, if they're going to be, is for carrying something in the library that someone finds offensive. Apart from a legal definition of obscenity, how do you handle this question, and maybe beginning with John, What are some of the pointers and the things that you think that the general public needs to consider when they start to become inflammatory about a particular work that's in a library?
I think it's important, Janelle, that people remember that we are all different, and the library is trying to appeal to the broadest spectrum of its community. And in order to do that, it's bound to collect items that are not in the mainstream of culture at the present time. I believe that libraries have a mandate to collect all sides of an issue, and therefore our library has, for example, items both pro and con abortion, which can certainly be an inflammatory issue on both sides of that point, and someone could take issue with any of those items. We rely on our policies to state why we purchased the item, in terms of balance, in terms of the need of the community in its broadest sense. And we usually try and talk with people about community in its broad sense, and the fact that there are items and issues that no complete community is going to agree on. And so that's how we address the issue.
So then what I hear John saying, Mary, and perhaps you have a comment to that, is that if one person is being protected, it's protection for all of us, in other words. Right. For all of our the issues that we would like to see addressed. Do you have some comments on that same kind of thing? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. What kind of thing is offensive?
Our students do a lot of papers. That's one of their assignments, is to do pro and con papers on a whole host of issues that could be inflammatory, and we carry both sides of the issue and wouldn't think to do anything else. And from a librarian's viewpoint, there's sometimes that's very hard, because librarians are like any other person. We have our own convictions, but you set those aside when you make selection policy and when you make selections, and you try and represent both sides of the issue, no matter what the issue is. So even though we don't have anything in writing yet, certainly our guideline is when we develop a subject matter in our collection, we look at what's published, pro and con, and we represent both of those, and that's to the benefit of the students and to the faculty or whoever is using the collection, because they need to look at both sides of an issue in order to make an informed choice.
Steve Sheen.
To a layperson, it would seem to me that you two direct different kinds of libraries. And John, I hope the term isn't offensive to you, but I always consider yours to be a recreational library. I don't know if you like that term or prefer some other one.
That's perfectly fine, Steve. That is our mission, is one of our primary roles is as a recreational library.
Do you, in the course of the kinds of materials you keep, as opposed to a resource library that Mary directs, are you going to get more complaints generally than she does?
I honestly don't know, because I've not worked in an academic library in a lot of years, and I don't remember what kind of percentage we have. We have had very, very few complaints from materials, probably 4 or 5 in the last 5 or 6 years. So it doesn't happen to us a lot. Because we do collect popular reading material, recreational reading, and some of that is certainly not high-class literature, we do have things that can be considered offensive, and I suppose Mary's right. If we're not offending someone, we're probably not doing our job, and in some senses. So to answer your question, yeah, we do have in the collection items that I suspect people would find offensive. There are some issues that I find offensive that we have collection information on, simply because it's important to have it. I really can't answer whether there's a difference. I can just say from my experience, we don't have a tremendous number of challenges.
Mary, any complaints at all at the North Idaho College Library?
We have not had but one direct complaint, and that was one that was from a staff member. And we resolved the issue with a letter that I wrote. I felt somewhat uncomfortable, again, because we did not have our written policy in place with a paragraph we could point to help that out, but I did develop a defense of what we had, and that had to do with issues on animal rights and maybe that isn't surprising, being that we're in North Idaho, and we have on both sides of the issue. We have those who have animal rights defenses, and then we have also Outdoor Life, and we have all the sportsmen's magazines, or some sportsman magazines too, and so we've got both sides of the issue on that again. But we have, in the nearly 4 years I've been here, had no external complaint. We did have at one point a rumor that our books on abortion had been removed from the shelf, but that was simply a rumor, and we had to work real hard to squelch that because it wasn't true. They were all checked out because people were doing papers.
One last quick question, Tony. John, it seems to me that so often what the public really deals with is a question of appropriateness. Is it what's appropriate for an adult, what they would consider to be very inappropriate for a teenager or an adolescent? Do you have a grading system like the movie theaters do? Or there?
No, we do not.
You do not.
In
so there's
fact,
no NR 17 or parental guidance or anything else?
No,
that's
not at all. In fact, quite the opposite. We have adopted the American Libraries Association dealing with minors' rights to material in the collection, and our collection is open totally to anyone, anywhere. That works both ways. We use many of our juvenile materials for adults, and there's no. We try not to see that as a stigma, but we do not have any rating system. We do not have any books that are off limits to certain age groups. We do not have any part of the collection that is closed. Everything that we own is available to everyone. The only restriction is whether it checks out of the building or not. We have some reference materials that do not check out of the building, but we have no restrictions on any of our materials in that sense.
I see.
I could add to that, I guess, a Latin phrase, in loco parentis, and that is something that librarians don't want to have that role. We are not the children's parents, and so we don't act in that role at all. We let parents decide what children read, and that, I think, is more appropriate.
Mary and I were talking earlier, and there's always points in history or times where a controversy arises, and libraries are getting attention today because of Madonna's most recent work. And I know in Spokane that this was an issue just recently. How would you react to that kind of issue and the criticism that libraries would get?
How would I react? Well, there have been a number of things that have happened both locally and nationally. And Maury Povich had a show just recently, and the headline was "Sex in the Library" because of the title of Madonna's book. I think it's probably gotten more hype than it's worth, because from my review of the book, it's not a great literary piece by any standards, but libraries, because they feel on the defense, unfortunately, have called press conferences to make their decision known as to whether or not they're going to buy it, whether or not it fits within their own collection development policy. I know Spokane Public has purchased the book, and because of the kind of binding that it has and the kind of appeal that it has to people who were afraid it was going to be taken, they put it at the reference desk for that reason, and for other reasons I'm not sure I know. So what they've done is they had an article, the newspaper, one newspaper man hung around the reference desk and in fact checked out who it was that was checking out the materials, and in fact violated people's privacy. So that the Madonna has had a number of issues that have to do not only with whether a library has it and First Amendment rights, but privacy issues as well, and there's been response in the Spokesman Review about that. My response is we as a library don't need to buy that, because we don't buy a lot of bestsellers. It doesn't fit within our curriculum, so it's not been an issue for us. But if it did meet our collection development needs, we would buy it.
John, in relation to what Mary is saying, oftentimes when something becomes very controversial and there is an attempt to censor it, doesn't that oftentimes guarantee its most large distribution?
Oh, certainly. The 600,000 copies of Madonna's book sold out, in large part, I think, due to the hype that has accompanied the work when it was first released, and sort of the national hysteria in some ways that went with that. And I suspect that Madonna is laughing all the way to her bank as a result of that. And in fact, the whole controversy from the library's point of view, it really in some ways turns out to be a marketing advantage to the publisher and to Madonna.
I have one final question, which is a very historical one, and again, Mary and I have had some wonderful conversations that brought some of these questions to my mind. If we go from a historical perspective, and I mean go back for hundreds of years, there has always been this very aggressive debate between those who wish to have what we call freedom and access to information, the printed matter, and for example, and those who want to censor it. And we go back to the great Alexander Library in which it was destroyed, and from reading history, it's my understanding that there were many collections that were only there, and it was a unique collection. It's been destroyed forever. I guess I have a two-part question. I'll start with you, John. First of all, what does that do to the footprints in history? And secondly, a rather difficult question philosophically, what motivates individuals to wish to destroy publications?
Oh, well, the second part of that one's a real killer. In terms of the footprints to history, when you think of the resources that were lost when the Alexandria Library was burned, I always look at it in terms of the knowledge that then had to be regained, and the amount of time it took to regain a fair amount of that knowledge in some useful form probably contributed to a fairly long period of history, which has been euphemistically referred to as the Dark Ages, but I suspect that that had that library remained intact, that there might have been a much more quickly developed sense of some of the scientific developments.
And the difficult part of the question
The difficult part of the question, I suspect, my one-word answer would be fear. People who wish to destroy collections, who wish to destroy information, do so out of fear and ignorance.
I'm going to interrupt with 30 seconds to let Mary have
Well,
a chance.
I'd say information is power, and it's been throughout history when dictators or whoever takes over a government, the first thing they do is shut down a press, they burn books, they burn libraries, they lock the doors to libraries, and that is because they know from whence freedom comes, and that is the reason the First Amendment is so important. I would add that in this day and age we have, I think, several more kind of insidious, because they aren't as evident things that are going on. One is our National Library, the Library of Congress, has materials that are disintegrating and not enough money to keep those things intact, so we're losing things.
I'm so sorry. Thank you both. It's been a most informative show. Thank you for being with us. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll be with us again next week at this same time, when we will discuss what we believe to be an important issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Telemedia Services on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.